Well, our panelists are coming out. I just wanted to say good morning and thank you for being here. My name's Joyce Reiser, and I am the executive producer of the syndicated radio show Y'all Access with Kelly Sutton, as well as the Country Heat Weekly podcast, where our mantra is to build a bigger table. And also, more importantly for this discussion, I'm a mama bear. So I thank you for being here. If you don't know what that is, come find me this week. If you do know what it is and you need a hug, come find me. I will be there as well. Our panel this morning is moderated by the amazing Tiffany Provenzano, who thought this was so important that she interrupted her maternity leave to be here. So I'm turning it over to her, and I thank you all so much for being here.
Hello. Yep, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the Y'all Means All breakfast, especially on this snowing morning. We really appreciate you all being here. I know we are currently in a climate where talking about diversity at all can feel a little bit tricky, but we thought that's why it was more important. The purpose of this panel is to talk about why diversity can actually help you. It's good for business. It can be good not just for the artists that you're platforming, but also for you personally, for your station, for your company. And so we just wanted to highlight some of the benefits while there's, different things going on currently around that word. We also, for the purpose of this panel, want to acknowledge that diversity means a lot of different things, right? So it can mean people from different identities, but it also is like diversity of sound is what we're going to be talking about, and just like the expansive nature of what country music is and can be. So we'll be touching on a bunch of different topics. For me, of who I am and why I'm here, my name's Tiffany Provenzano. I worked in the music industry for over 10 years on the label side before moving to the nonprofit, and I am now the executive director of a program called Equal Access, which lifts up underrepresented voices in country music. And I am thrilled to be here. We're going to kick it off first with Sean. Sean, as our resident radio programmer here, I would love to start with you and have you tell us a little bit about your experience in country music. Specifically, first, Sean hosts a top-rated morning show on Radio 1's adult contemporary station WYXB in Indianapolis, and he also programs their sister country station WLHK. And in addition to his radio roles, he is also a licensed therapist. So Sean, can you tell us a little bit about what your experience has been like working in country radio?
Good job on getting all the call letters correct.
Yeah, sorry that I had to have my phone with the notes for some of the specifics.
Thanks for being here this morning. My experience has been incredible, actually. And as a gay man, I wasn't 100% sure that it would be. I can go back 15 years prior to a job where I outed myself to my employer, and their first response was, "Yeah, you got to go." And the idea of that happening now in my current role, is sort of unconscionable. And so while we're going to talk about ways that this format and this industry can be more inclusive and more expansive, I think it's important to celebrate the progress and the evolution that has occurred over the years.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's really important to talk about, that you had a negative experience in a different genre, got fired for your identity, but in country, you've actually had nothing but positive experience, which I think is really important to highlight. Shannon, I'd love to go to you next. Shannon, for those of you that don't know, is a staple in this town, Grammy Award-winning songwriter. He's the head of creative at BMI. All these different, we have he was the Grammy chapter president. He's on the board of the ACMs, the CMAs, the National Museum of African American Music. Like, he knows country music, right? And I would love for you to talk about just some of the positives that you've seen from country music becoming a more welcoming space, and also some ideas you have for how it can keep advancing.
Well, thank you for having me, Tiffany. Good morning, everyone. Thank everybody for being here this morning on this stormy morning. Let me tell you a little story. Buddy of mine and I were having lunch a few years ago, and so country music came up. We were talking country music, and he's a black man, and we're talking, and asked him how he felt about country music. He said, so he tells me a story. He says, years ago, he was watching the Arsenio Hall show, and he said Trisha Yearwood was the guest. Had no idea who Trisha Yearwood was. He said, man, she rocked. So the next day, he said he went and bought the tape, and he said, and tape specifically, because this is back in the day, right? He said he went and bought the tape. He said, man, I played that tape until it popped. And he said, that's the last time I spent money with the country music industry, because that's the last time the country music industry sought my attention. For them to put Trisha Yearwood on the Arsenio Hall show meant that the country music industry, or the powers that be, were interested in reaching that audience. So mission accomplished. They did exactly what they set out to do. He went out the next day and bought the record and played it until it popped, but you didn't seek his attention again. So that's the beauty. Went all the way around to get back here, talking about the positives of country becoming more inclusive, becoming wider. That's really the bottom line. There's a lot of data that shows that country's growing, and it's not because the existing listener or consumer is doing more of that. It's because of who's coming. So as the awareness grows, country grows, and then when that grows, the bottom line grows. So the thing is, long story short, country music industry, you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Yep, I love that. I love that Trisha anecdote, because I think it brings up an important point of just meeting people where they are, right? That there's a lot of fans available, and how do we make the effort to reach out to the new folks?
Well, and that's the thing. I think everybody, when we start talking about diversifying country, what's up, B? I think everybody thinks that we're talking about changing the music all the time. It's not that.
Right.
Who are you inviting to the conversation? Who are you inviting to listen to the music? I was at a CMA meeting one time, and they were just talking about, they did the international report. We talked Australia. Australia, for those that don't know, is the third largest country consuming market in the world, right? And I'm like, okay, but you hadn't talked to Antioch yet. You haven't invited, we're talking about inviting Australia and all of Europe to this country conversation, right. And you haven't told Edge Hill yet. Right. You haven't told East Nashville completely yet. Right. So that's the thing. There's still a lot of tread on this tire, y'all. Like, there is still a lot in terms of awareness. My daughter turned me on to Taylor Swift, Casey Musgraves, and so that's really how I really fell in love with the genre. Was really my daughter. My daughter put me on the game.
That's awesome. That's great. Madeline, I'd love to go to you next. As an independent artist that's seen a ton of success in this genre, from opening to Chris Stapleton. This summer, she's going to be opening for Willie Nelson. But who, as an artist, you have a very expansive sound, right? She blends jazz, soul, rock, country all together. I would love for you to talk about your experience coming up in this genre.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out in the snow, and thanks for having me. I've had a really privileged, for lack of a better word, come up in this city, in this industry. I moved to Nashville 4 years ago from Houston, and it's been kind of the craziest ride, just being able to, be signed to a publishing deal within the first year of being here, going on the road with Chris within the first year of being here, going on the CMA Awards with Mickey Guyton and Brittany Spencer within the first 9 months of being in Nashville. So it's been kind of a crazy whirlwind, but obviously being a woman of color, you do get to see some of that pushback and some of that, I think, Shannon brings up an awesome point about these, stations leaving money on the table, whether it's the consumer or anybody else. I see it more from the standpoint of, I think they're leaving money on the table as far as artists and their empires surrounding them, of whether or not they want to actually take songs to country radio. My experience in the label system, especially right now, as an artist, I'm a business owner, and so I have to ask, and vet for myself. I have to ask different artists, and so when I got signed, I'm asking artists like Tiara Kennedy and, Tennille Townes and, all of my good buddies of what does this look like to put my music on country radio? Is this something that I want to focus my efforts towards? And you get the answers of you spend a lot of time away from home, you go on these very long radio tours, you spend a lot of money on these radio tours, and you're getting these, 2 a.m. slots, these 4 a.m. slots, especially if, you're a woman, and especially if you're a woman of color. And so, from my vantage point, it's almost like, not only for me, but also from the label, it seemed like the best idea at the time was, make your song blow up on TikTok. And then you get the opportunity to, basically kind of tell the stations to play your song if it blows up at a certain capacity, or better yet, you're getting your audience to go and tell the stations themselves. And so, that's label dollars. And, if you're an independent artist, that could be private funding, that's money on the table that the artist wants to use to promote their music to radio, but instead they're probably going to be using it to promote it via socials or anything else before radio,
Yep.
You know what? If I could, really quick, and a lot of people may not realize too. Interesting thing about what you're saying too, independent, but even on a major label, the money you're talking about spending for that visit to that radio station, a flight maybe or a drive, hotel rooms, food, the whole thing. They don't realize, even if you are on a major label, we call them label dollars, but it's all charged back to you. You got to recoup every penny of that. So anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Brooke, actually, I'd love to jump to Brooke. Brooke here up on the screen, but she can actually speak to this. Brooke has been a successful artist for over a decade. She actually knows a lot of you guys. She actually met her wife on a radio tour. And Brooke, I would love to have you just talk a little bit about your experience that you've had with country radio, because I know it touches on some of the stuff Shannon just brought up, actually.
Yeah, totally. Hi, everybody. I so wish I could be there with you guys today. I live on back roads that do not get plowed. So, so good to be here anyways. Yeah, for me, radio tour was incredible because I got to meet so many people so quickly. And I think probably most importantly, I got to meet my wife. So thank you to country radio for that. But, my radio tour cost over $1 million. So I am still recouping that now, which is like just so wild to think about. It was 9 years ago at this point. So yeah, radio tour is super, super expensive. I know that there are other like more innovative ways of doing radio tour at this point, but back then when I was, putting out music for the first time, I was in a tour bus and I went to, I think, every single country radio station in the United States. So that can get super, super pricey. So yeah, over $1 million in the hole to just start out my career. With that being said, I went to country radio thinking I was a straight white woman. Like why would I not be able to get played on country radio, right? This was before Tomatogate. But I met my wife out on that very first week of radio tour, divinely. And pretty soon after that, once my record label at the time found out that I was with a woman and I was gay, they didn't want to send me to radio anymore. So I haven't been to radio since I've been out, but I will say that as far as my fans and my fan base, it's been an incredible experience coming out and getting to share my authenticity and getting to share who I actually am. Because when I was on radio tour, I was kind of a robot. Like I was kind of like acting as this person that I was supposed to act as versus being myself. So I'm really grateful to get to be myself in the country music space. And I think that it's just the beginning of queer people feeling comfortable here in country music, where a lot of people grew up, loving country music, and then they found out they were queer and didn't feel like they had a space here. And now I feel like there are, more and more queer artists that are, creating a safe space for queer people in the country music space. So I'm very excited to be a part of country music and be queer right now.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I think Brooke also brings up a good point of just highlighting some of the differences that what the radio tours used to look like 10 years ago versus some of the experiences that Madeline has had, what they look like now. And I think that there have been some positives that came out of the pandemic as far as people being open to some Zoom meetings. There's been some changes of what a radio tour looks like. And I, challenge you guys all to consider, like, what are the ways that we could make it more accessible? I know Brooke actually has like a small baby now, that what are the ways that we make it? It's hard if you have a family, not just the financial costs and everything, but how can we make it more accessible for you to be able to meet with some of the folks that you're wanting to platform? I think that now is a great time, much like last year, to talk about Beyonce and just as a whole the expansive nature of country music. I know at CRS last year she had just put out her singles and it was a big topic, but now she has just won Album of the Year and Country Album of the Year. And I think, similar to how Casey Musgraves with Golden Hour, how didn't maybe get a ton of love on the country side, but then still won these marquee level Grammys. It proves that there are a ton of fans looking for that music, right? So what are we doing? To Shannon's point, his daughter put him on to Taylor and Casey, who weren't the traditional country sense, but who are country music, right? And so how do we make sure that we're still acknowledging that and, reaching those fans? I just want to highlight a couple of stats that Shannon kind of alluded to as far as that there are fans out there that we are leaving at the table. CMA had a report in 2020 that said that over 47%, this is 2020, so 5 years ago, so the numbers are even higher now, but 47% of Hispanic adults listen to country music. And that's over double from what it was at 2010. So over double, monumental growth, right? 38% of Black adults listen to country music. Again, that's over double what it was in 2010. And it's been 5 years since this report, right? The white audience went from 51% from 45. So kind of plateaued, right? We're not necessarily gaining a ton of more white listeners. They're listening, the ones that are interested, but there are a lot of other listeners that are available, for your station. And so I think that's important to highlight. Also want to note that Luminate had a report last year that said that country music is one of the top 3 fastest growing genres, largely thanks to Gen Z having an interest in country music, right? But what we know is that Gen Z doesn't care about genres as much, right? They're just finding the music that they want. And so I think being open to that, I know artists hear this all the time, people want to know what their Gen Z audience looks like because everybody is chasing that audience. And so I think keeping that in mind, that they do have an interest in country music, but what are you doing to be open to reaching them? And then all that said, to know that there are all these listeners, Dr. Jada Watson had a report in 2021 that said that BIPOC artists only make up less than 4% of the commercial radio or commercial country industry. So all this to say that there is a huge audience, but they're not totally being represented. And so how do we make sure that we are taking advantage of that, right? To reach it, because again, part of the purpose of this panel is that it's ultimately good for business. Sean, I would love to go to you because you mentioned that your station did play Beyonce. Can you speak about how that went, and then also just touch on some of the other artists that you've platformed and how that's gone?
Sure. I mean, it's important, I think, as a programmer to take calculated risks, especially if you have a company that lets you do that. I'm fortunate enough to have that. We were one of the first handfuls of stations across the country to play Jelly Roll, and back in the day, that was considered a calculated risk, bizarrely. Now it's hard to imagine seeing, now not playing Jelly would be a weird risk. We were one of the first handfuls of stations to play Shabuzi. We played Beyonce right out of the gate. And we did that because I think that radio is at its best when it is a reflective medium. It is reflecting back what people are thinking about and talking about and caring about. And Beyonce certainly checked all of those boxes at the time. It was a cultural moment happening, not just in our format, but just culturally as a whole. And so we thought it really important to be there and reflect that back to our people in Indianapolis. And no matter what I may feel about the art or the artist or any altruistic goals that I have for my station and pleasing the base and expanding it just like you'd think people would want to do in politics, I'm ultimately beholden to the data of the response of our audience, and our audience in a more resounded way than I've ever experienced said, this is not for us and we don't want to hear this on Hank FM. And so we took that calculated risk, and 3 days later we stopped playing the song.
Yeah. And I think that's important. I think that we do recognize that there is some of having to look at the data that you played it, it didn't work, and so you stopped, and that's fine. But you mentioned with Shabuzi, you've mentioned Frank Ray before, that actually did perform really well, and that you guys had a whole campaign around the Frank Ray thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, to Shannon's point about reaching out to folks, and I love your Trisha Yearwood story. Similarly, I think that if you're wanting to invite more people into your tent, you first of all have to be a place that they're going to feel welcome. You have to give them something that's going to benefit them, and then you have to market yourself. You have to tell them, like, hey, we are here for you. And so we used a Frank Ray record as an opportunity to do that, and we did a whole digital marketing campaign around it, targeting bilingual people in hot Hispanic zip codes in Indianapolis, saying like Hank FM is a station for you. And to your point about it's not always the people that we maybe think are listening or consuming our media are not always the people who we think are doing that. My adult contemporary station in Indianapolis, our cluster has 2 Hispanic stations in it, yet my adult contemporary station is the highest cuming Hispanic station in the state of Indiana. We can look at control panel reports and see who is driving our ratings with Nielsen. The biggest driver of Hank's ratings over the last year was a 46-year-old African-American man. So you do have to look at the data and follow it. And if you're going to do something meaningful and different, you have to market it.
Yep, I agree. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Madeline, I'd love to jump to you as... I think one thing that we've established before, one of the biggest hurdles in country radio is the pipeline, that a lot of times you have to be signed to a major label in order to even get to country radio. And as an independent artist, I'd love for you to talk about all the ways that you've still been able to get your music to fans, separate from country radio, right? All of your top songs have millions of streams, and so I'd love for you to just speak to like ways that you have reached your fans separate from radio.
Yeah. Shout out to DSPs. They have been really, really helpful in terms of getting my music out. And this is a classic case of all cylinders firing off at the same time. And a lot of times we see it when someone pops off on TikTok. They don't necessarily have numbers on streaming, or vice versa. If someone has, multiple country radio number ones, a lot of times they won't be able to sell, 500 cap venues. And so it's really important to make sure that you're diversifying like the entire pool. So your streaming is, good, your touring is good. I've, had the opportunity of going on the road with Morgan Wade and Ashley McBride. And, Morgan Wade is a perfect example of someone that doesn't get played on country radio a lot, but she sells out every single venue she plays, sells out all of her VIP rounds and everything. And so I think it's really important to just like make sure that everything in your catalog is constantly feeding your audience. And so even if you do have a country, number one or whatever, that it's kind of showing across the board instead of just one area, if that makes any sense.
That's perfect. Yep. Thank you so much for sharing. Shannon, I'd love to jump to you. Can you speak to some of the ways that you've seen country grow, like what you've seen work? I know that we've talked a little bit about, just some different ways that you think, maybe not being so beholden to the genres, have some other genres have different classifications, traditional versus contemporary. What are some of the things that you think that you have seen work as far as country music growing, but also ways that you think that it can continue to grow, or ways, that people should consider thinking outside the box there?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting, and I was thinking about it when he was talking about Beyonce. It's interesting because genre was always a construct of radio and labels. It was a way to market to specific audiences, right? Country, let's be real. Country started as hillbilly. Country was meant to be Southern and white. Blues was meant to be Southern and black. That's what this was. This was a way to market to specific audiences. Regardless of the fact that they made the same music in the same places, they did all of this together. White folks were doing what we would call blues in the Mississippi Delta. Black folks were in Appalachia playing with white folks and doing. So what happened was these labels got attached to the people. Genre's more about who than what. Remember that. Genre is more about who than what. The beauty of now is that that's coming down. This generation, like you said, they don't care about that. So these lines are being blurred and erased in a lot of cases. So what country sounds like and who's making, it's different, because really what we're saying now when we say country is really Southern. Country music is an expression of Southern life and culture That's what it is. Black, white, Latin, whoever. It's an expression of Southern culture. It's the sound of Southern culture. So that's really what we're saying now when we say country. There's a big opportunity. I was thinking too about what we called some years back bro country. And I never really became a thing, but we know what I'm talking about. Bro country, right? But the sound of bro is interesting because what you would call bro is kind of a joke, right? That's bro country. Well, it evolved. I guess it was all beer and trucks for a while, but the production style stayed. The lyrical content changed. That evolved, but the production style has remained. And so that's what Morgan Wallen's building a base on, the Russell Dickerson's of the world. Man, that's what they're building all of that on was the sound of bro, even though lyrically it's moved on. So that was an opportunity for country to do something that rock and other genres have done already, which is subgenre. That was country's opportunity to say, you know what, let's not call this bro, maybe this is contemporary country. And other genres have been able to do that more recently as far as the Grammys go, the blues category. Not every category has a traditional and a contemporary category. As long as country's been a thing, at this point, I think we're here. Every generation has a right to define the music for themselves, and that's always been the case. So what space do we allow for progressive? Where do we say there's always going to be George Strait, there's always going to be George Jones, there's always going to be Hank, there's always going to be Willie? That's traditional. But what do you do with the Jelly Roll? And so I think if there was a contemporary Grammy category, a contemporary country album of the year, and Beyonce won that, well, nobody said a word. If there was a traditional category, let's say Lainey would have won that. Hypothetically speaking, Lainey would have won that. Beyonce would have won contemporary. Nobody would have said a word. But it's only because there's the one bucket. And so what's happening is we're forcing everybody into a bucket. Everybody feels they have to identify with this established bucket that's been established or created by industry. Us, radio, executives, labels, we're creating the buckets. And so people think they have to fit the buckets we create. So it's on us to create more buckets, and I think that now is a great opportunity to give people the option. You said something too, man, that's interesting too about, this contemporary conversation, because a lot of people are afraid, well, I'll lose my traditional listener base if I pivot to contemporary. Like, what does that look like? I don't have the answer, but it's definitely a question worth, on a topic worth exploring. How do we not pigeonhole the genre because we're so afraid to we're so afraid of what we'll lose versus what we'll gain.
Yep.
So.
That's great. Yep. Thank you for
You
sharing.
said that country music represents the Southern culture. I feel like it's becoming almost representing American culture altogether, just seeing how worldwide country music has become. It has been the stamp of representing what is all things American, which is really cool.
Well, you know what? Hip-hop is in an interesting place right now. Like, if you're a real hip-hop listener, I'll keep it real. You're tired right now. I ought to shoot them up. It's over. So it's in an interesting place right now. Hip hop is in a reset. And what I found, especially for black folks, they're finding country now because they're tired of what urban radio has been pushing. We're tired of that conversation. We're tired of the misogyny. We're tired of that as a culture. It's just been what's pushed on. We're tired of that. And so wholesome music, family music, love. My son's 32. My son told me something a couple years ago. He's like, man, you grew up on music with love. He said, I didn't grow up on music with love. And that was an interesting thing. And so that's what country offers. Yep. It's definitely got the whiskey song, the whiskey and the heartbreak, but that's the blues. See, it's the same thing.
Right.
But there's feeling in the music. And so I found that as a community, as a culture, I'm finding a lot of black people gravitating towards country these days, and maybe more a traditional version of that, but gravitating towards country because there's something refreshing, something wholesome about it, to your point.
And I think something that we've seen too is that, as you all know, I mean, you guys represent stations all over the country, right? Not just in the South, that the country music is popular everywhere. Like a lot of, if you're from a rural area, whether that's rural New York or rural Alabama, you probably grew up listening to country music. And one thing we found through Equal Access is just how many folks did grow up listening to. I always reference Kadeem Phillips was one of the managers in our first program, or in our first cohort. he grew up outside of Memphis. You know, he's a black man. He's like, but I grew up like wearing cowboy boots, like fishing at the pond. You know, like I was country. I listened to country. But as I came up in the industry, like he ended up working in hip hop because he assumed that's where he had to work because country music wasn't going to welcome him in necessarily. And so I think knowing that, like, we've seen this when Beyonce came out, how many people said that they grew up loving country, that they listened to Shania, you know what I mean? They love the Dixie Chicks, they love Faith Hill, and they were like so excited to now feel welcomed back in. And a lot of artists saw a lot of growth on their socials, on their streaming, as now there was this whole new audience that was like, wait a second, can we listen to country again? You know, like, am I welcome here? And they started following other artists, and I think that's been like really awesome to see. I do want to shout out real quick also to your point of how it's growing even internationally. Reese Palmer does great work. Her Color Me Country program is like incredible, and I recommend you guys all checking that out. And she takes a group of artists every year to the Long Road Festival in the UK, which is this like incredible country festival over there. You guys probably know Balin and Holler Country and everything, but you know, she takes a group of artists, and it's always like a diverse group of artists from her Color Me Country program that plays over there, and the love they get is incredible. Madeline went in 2022, and it was like 2021, I guess. And it was incredible. You know, how many people were there and just the love they had for the music and for the genre. And it was almost that they just loved the American nature of it, you know? And it's been really cool to see.
I think they faked some barbecue stand or something. They did a fake barbecue stand.
It felt a little cosplay. It was a little bit like a Ren Fair, if I'm going to be honest, but in the best way, you know? And I feel like that's important, you know, to know that there are fans internationally too. And I do just want to highlight too that, you know, in addition to Color Me Country, some of the other great folks that have been doing this work, Shannon Sanders books the BMI stage at CMA Fest every year and has always done a great job of booking diverse acts on that stage. CMA Fest as a whole has done a great job of diversifying what their lineup looks like and just exposing those artists to the larger fan base that does come to CMA Fest. I also want to highlight CMT and their Next Women of Country program has done a great job. I think for diversity in country, an important point is also just recognizing that there needs to be more women just as a whole. I also want to call out Black Opry, who's done a great job highlighting or bringing up other Black country artists. ACM's had an on-ramp program, equal access obviously, through M Theory. There are a lot of great folks doing a lot of great work. And through that, there are a lot of great, not just artists, but also professionals, right? There are a lot of like queer managers. There are a lot of Black, Hispanic managers, or the people that want to work at labels, want to work at your company. So I think, you know, the importance by looking at some of these programs is not just like other artists you could platform, but also just other industry professionals that like maybe it makes sense for you to like hire them also. Shannon, you've brought up before that sometimes with meeting people where they are, that it's important to, you know, you brought up like maybe more women programmers sometimes like ends up leading to different plays. You know, I think that's a great point just to make.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, I'm sitting there thinking now, like, to diversify, you know, what this looks like. And just thinking about the fact, you know, even when what you're saying, like all the things that diversity means, it's not even about that. It's not about, I think diversity says, we're accepting of our differences, but we're overlooking the one thing we have in common, a love for the music.
Right.
So that's the thing. That's the way to go into this. It's all about who shares the love for this music. I don't care where you come. None of these things matter. That's the whole point. Our differences don't matter. What do we have in common is what matters, and it's a love for the music and for the culture.
For sure. Brooke, I'd love to jump to you. I'd love for you to share some things that have happened recently that have given you hope, some positive changes. I want to highlight that Brooke now she does the weekly theme song for SEC Nation each week. But I'd love for you to just kind of talk about, you know, what has been going. You mentioned that you haven't been to radio recently, but just some positive things that give you hope as far as your fan base continues to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about the environment in country music when I first came out on radio tour and how it is now. So I know that we're talking about like a span of 9 years here, but really I think that things have changed since 2020. So I came out in 2021 and I definitely, you know, knew that I could be faced with the consequence of like getting kicked out of country music. That is not at all what happened. happened. I mean, I feel like I've been loved and embraced so much by country music and, you know, the staple leaders in the genre. And I feel like it's just inviting, like we've been talking about this whole time, you know, it's inviting more people into the genre. Even if you're not queer, you have a cousin or a best friend or an aunt or an uncle or somebody that is in your family that you love that is queer. So I think that because more people are being, you know, living their lives out loud and being more authentic, people are realizing, oh yeah, there are a lot of queer people around here and like, it's not a big deal. They're just like us and they can love country music as well. So, for example, one of my best friends, he's in the Equal Access program, Chris Hausman. He's a queer country artist, and he recently released a song called Guilty as Sin, and he had a man in the video with him as his love interest. And it went on YouTube, and the comments are literally like 98% positive, which I think is incredible. There's so many people, and I mean, this goes for my music videos as well, but I feel like, you know, this is a video that came out last year, and to see how many people found themselves in that music video and said, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that I was welcome here. And now I'm seeing your music video and it's, you know, it's very country. He looks very country. A lot of people say like, oh, I thought you were an ally because he doesn't look gay, whatever that means. But it's so cool to see people seeing themselves in country music for, you know, maybe the first time, because there is more diversity that's coming into country music, and it's allowing more people and it's inviting more people into country music. So there's so much positivity that I see and so much hope for the future. And just currently, the environment is so drastically different than when I came out and like when I, you know, realized that I was gay. And I feel like if I was coming into country music right now as a queer country artist, I would have a lot less fear because people are doing it and it's not as scary anymore.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Brooke. Oh yeah.
Hey, Brooke, real quick. You talking about the SEC Network, Take the Party Wherever We Go?
Yeah.
You know I wrote that song, right?
I did not know you wrote that song.
Yeah. We take the party wherever we go. Yeah. I did it. Long time ago with Robert Randolph. Yeah, I wrote, produced, and original version.
That's
awesome.
Incredible. I love that song so much. You're a baddie.
Awesome. That's great. I love that connection. I also want to, for maybe like the only time this will ever be a valid sentence, but if you want to feel great, go read the YouTube comments on Chris Hausman's Guilty as Sin video. It is just incredible. Like, just so many positive, like, he was prepared for it to be awful, and it was just nothing but wonderful, of just so many people just like thanking him for putting this song out and putting the video out. So definitely check that out. I want to be cognizant of time. The timer actually isn't working. Okay, great. Okay, so you just keep me posted. Okay, so we're going to move on. We're going to do a quick little lightning round. We're just going to kind of go down for everyone. What are some of the limitations that you see with country radio?
Yeah. Radio to me is a beautiful medium that I've given my life to, and it does have limitations, and they seem to be ever increasing. If you are a DSP person, or if you're an artist, or if you work for a label, I'm going to sort of make up that your pond is the entire planet, 8 billion people, or whatever we're at now. My pond has 2 million people in it in central Indiana. That's about the population of Metro Indianapolis. And then when you take that 2 million people that I have in my pond and you fraction out the people who are still actively consuming radio.
Right.
And then you fraction out the people who are actively listening to country radio. Right. And then, as I do and as many of you do, you have a direct in-market, in-format competitor. Then you're splitting that between 2 mediums. Right. And then any radio folks in the room will know the challenges that we have with Nielsen measurement it makes the margin for error not only sort of slimmer than ever, but it makes it almost non-existent. And so that's something that you have to consider when you are in sort of a song-by-song battle. You take calculated risks, but they are risks.
Right. Yep. The shrinking medium and format is definitely a key thing. Madeline, I'd love to go to you next.
I just think the limitations are women being on radio. I think, when we talked earlier, I was like, Ella Langley is one of my really close friends, and she somehow slipped in at the last second, right before the 2025 year began, and got a #1 radio spot, but she was with a dude on the track. And I think you actually said, well, Lainey had a #1, and I was like, great, 2 females in 1 year, that's awesome. But it's like, man, I feel like women make up such a huge part of the marketplace, and it's wild to me that radio doesn't take more advantage of making sure that women feel heard on the other side, and it would increase, just even how much they consume country in general, if they can see themselves on the other side, or hear themselves, I guess, rather. So I feel like the lack of women being on radio is a huge limitation for sure.
Yep, I agree. I remember when I first heard one of the old, the rules that you can't play 2 women back to back, and I thought that was just an old wives' tale. I thought that was a myth, that there's no way that's real. And then from speaking to programmers, they were like, no, it's still real, and here's why we think it, and here's why we do it. And I think that it is time that we can kind of challenge, how do we let go of some of those old rules? And I know this comes up at CRS every year, but just, that we know that women do perform well. We look at the other genres, we see how well women perform. We know in the 90s that women were killing the country music game and the genre. So I think that's a great point, that just women as a whole. Brooke, I'd love to go to you. Some of the limitations you see.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. Growing up on 90s country, there were no rules for that. There were so many female artists, I can't even begin to name them, because there are so many huge female artists that I grew up listening to on country radio. So I don't know when all those rules changed, where oh yeah, you can play country music, or you can play women on country radio all the time. And then all of a sudden, we just had Miranda and Carrie and Taylor for 10 years. I don't know what happened, but I know that for me personally, I miss hearing women on country radio. I think that Lainey and Meg Maroney and Ella Langley are huge examples of the huge success that you can see in country radio when you allow female voices to be heard on country radio. If you look at them compared to a lot of the male artists are kind of blending into each other, and the female artists are they are their own brands. They have their own flavors. They have their own sauce. And I think that, if you look at those 3 women that they've given a chance to be seen and heard, you can see what a huge impact they've already made in such a short time that some of the men are not making. Another limitation is, I think that country music follows pop in a way. I feel like country music is a few years behind what pop is doing. And I'll say for a really long time, we had a lot of bi pop artists like Halsey and Miley Cyrus, who, never really came out with a girlfriend, but sometimes with boyfriends or whatever, but they were bi. Now we have Chappell Roan. Chappell Roan is the biggest thing to ever hit pop music, and she is a lesbian. So I'm just saying, I think that there is huge potential to tap into for a huge queer country artist. That needs to happen, and it's already happening in pop, and we need to catch up.
I love that. Shannon, your turn.
Really quickly, I think, Sean touched on it. Just a lot of the limitations about being in the market and having competition, it makes you program fearfully, I think. You're definitely, and I've seen it firsthand, you're definitely keeping an eye on your competitor. You're really playing a lot of the same music, but then you said something too, rules. Music Master. Any of you guys use Music Master? in here. I don't know if I can talk about you do. So in radio program, it's radio programmer software, right? And it's something called rules. You can set the rules, and you can say, don't play 2 up-tempo songs back to back. Don't play this and this. Like, you tell it what to do, and so literally what you're talking about, they've made these rules. It's not just a wives' tale. People have really gone into the computer and say, don't play 2 women back to back.
Right.
That's what you got to not do.
Right.
Undo the rule in the computer. It's really that simple, but it's really going through and saying, you know what, the things here that we've been doing as best practices is not that. Like, undo is literally probably categorized in this software as a rule. I know in that particular software, rules, and you're telling it, don't do this, don't do this. And if you have that set as a rule, that's why that's happening. Break the rules. It's literally, when you say break the rules, let's go in the software and undo the thing that says don't play 2 women back to back.
Yep, that's perfect. Love to know that is just an easier
thing this is an easy fix. Just undo that.
I think we're about out of time, so I just want to thank you all. Sounds like, to recap some of the things that we mentioned, just some of the limitations are just the genre or the format as a whole is shrinking, so consolidation of the industry, how programmers are finding music is part of the problem, not playing enough women, not playing enough songs in general. We've talked about that it's just like a lot of the same songs like on repeat. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement there.
And play some regional artists. Play some artists from your hometown. Play some people from your area. Help develop stars and help people come up.
I love that. I think we've talked a lot about in previous, panels too, of just like the old school way of it used to be radio programmers are the ones that broke artists, that they were the ones like, I found this person, I love her or him, I'm going to play him. And then you get to like, what a nice like feeding for the ego to know that you are the person that helped break this artist, that you're the one that put them on. Like, I think that is something to like lean into that, like where you have the room for that, definitely playing some of the regional folks and whatnot. We don't have a ton of time to go into this next round, so I do just want to kind of in closing, say that we'll be around here afterwards if you want to come up and talk to anyone. Brooke, I want to give you, someone came up, since you're not here in person, someone came up and gave me a note just to mention to Brooke that your performance opening for Garth in Eugene, Oregon was outstanding. And hello to Hillary from Jim Varnell. He says hi to you and that he loves you.
Oh, hi. Good to see you. I mean, not see you, but good to hear from you.
And so in closing, I just kind of want to mention again that diversity just means like not homogenous, right? That it just means like not all of the same thing, that it just not all straight white men. It can be playing women, playing people of color, playing queer artists, playing people from different, religions, different abilities, just kind of keeping in mind. And it's not just who you platform, but again, who you're hiring, what your program or what your station looks like, what your company looks like, that ultimately what we know is that, ways that we can think outside the box, getting rid of like the old data collection methods, whatever, that like as we see people reflected, if people see themselves reflected, that it makes them more open to joining this program. I want to highlight, because obviously we could talk forever about a lot of this, that there are actually other panels this week that'll be doing deeper dives into some of these subjects. So there's a panel called What is Mainstream Country Anyway? There's a research presentation called The Country Fan, Reviewing, Retaining, and Recruiting Your Listener, and one called We've Got Some Help, How to Embrace Crossover Artists and the New Audience. We've touched on some of this, right? We've talked on the research, the data, crossover. And so obviously we didn't have time to get into all of it, but there are other panels that'll be doing deeper dives, and we encourage you to check those out. And as a whole, we just want to thank you guys for coming. I know that this is, a tricky way to spend your snowy morning, so we appreciate you grabbing breakfast, hitting us first thing. We're happy to be the ones to kick off CRS, and we hope you guys have a great week, and feel free to come up and say hi to everyone afterwards. And I know we didn't have any time for questions, but feel free to come up, and if you have any direct questions that you want to talk with the group, you're welcome to, and we appreciate you all. Thank you so much.